think that there is some level of a kind of defender's advantage in this shift?
Attacker only has to be right once, whereas the defender has to be right every time in order to, defend their perimeter.
Why does cheaper discovery via AI actually increase the demand for contextualization, prioritization, and so on, rather than reduce it?
The average organization both couldn't and shouldn't worry about every single potential vulnerability that might be present in their environment.
How do you all think practitioners should start thinking about securing AI itself, in addition to just deploying it and using it too?
AI is special and it's not special at the same time.
What would you actually change about how they prioritize and act, maybe even starting this quarter?
It's tempting to kind of put your head in the sand and think, well, the bad guys won't exploit that in time. I just think that's a very dangerous.
Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Show. My name is Chris Hughes, and today I'm joined by Eric Doerr. Eric, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to chat with you. I got a chance to chat at RSA, and honestly, just a little anecdote from my end. I spent a lot of my time in the military, in the public sector, and there's various parts of my career where I spent a lot of time with your product, and various parts of my career doing vuln management and things like that. So it's pretty surreal now to be chatting with someone of your caliber from the company. But for folks that don't know you, don't know the team, can you tell us a bit about your background in the company as well?
Sure. So I'm the Chief Product Officer at Tenable, so I lead our research and development org. Been at the company a little over a year, and was previously at Google for a few years and Microsoft for a bunch of years before that, working on various pieces of security. Most of my prior career was focused more on the post-breach, the kind of SOC and security operations side. And part of what attracted me to Tenable was this kind of shift in the industry around what we now call exposure management, this notion that, look, there's a lot more we can do, before the bad guy got into a company, and that in fact you need a whole different set of tools, and in some cases connect to the existing tools that you have differently in order to set up teams to do that. That was my thesis for joining, a year and a half ago when I was making that decision. I wasn't smart enough to predict all that was going to happen with AI over that time period, but I would say, man, it's only more important from my point of view to be getting ahead of the issues and proactively and preemptively fixing them, in the world of, accelerated AI discovery of vulnerabilities and accelerated exploitation by bad actors out there.
Yeah, it's funny. I wrote a book on vulnerability management several, 3-4 years ago at this point, and I feel like AI has made vulnerability management cool again. Like everyone was like, everyone dreaded vulnerability management and had nothing good to say about it, but now it's like the hot thing. Everyone's talking about it, and it's cool again. So I'm excited to hear that. As someone who's written about it quite a bit and spent a lot of time in this aspect of the cyber career field. And I know, of course, you all are as well. Yeah. But there is a lot of noise, too, when it comes to AI and cybersecurity. Like from where you sit, how are frontier models actually changing the fight today on both the offensive and defensive side? And do you think there's more promise than reality, or kind of how do you think about it all?
Well, it's a complicated question. I mean, there's definitely a hype cycle, right? And if you read the headlines, I don't know, as a relative insider, there's a lot of BS in the headlines, right? But underneath that, man, there really is a transformation happening. And so I think that sifting through kind of what's real, what's maybe not real today, but gonna be real in 6 months or 12 months, it's tricky. And we could spend the whole time just talking about that. I mean, look, we are certainly seeing evidence of, some bad actors using more and more advanced tooling and AI in their tooling. But I'll say, one of the things that I've said is that bad actors are the most perfect representation of capitalism. Meaning, most bad actors are in it for money, or are running a nation state program or part of some nation state program. And in both cases, they're actually really good at spending the least amount of effort to accomplish their objective. And the reality is there's a whole lot of organizations out there that still haven't deployed MFA or haven't deployed it well, or, the long list of things where like, yeah, we know we're supposed to do that in security. And so, I think the thing sometimes that gets lost in the noise is, you know, you're going to do as little work as possible to get your objective. And in a lot of cases, you don't need AI to be successful these days. So, in some ways, I'd say we might see less of the, oh my God, everything is changing, because it's not yet necessary for the bad guy to really change.
Yeah, they are incredibly efficient and effective, and they do, I don't want to say lazy, but they do the least amount of work possible. And honestly, many organizations, I hate to say it, but your point too, like we haven't done the bare essentials in many cases, so we don't exactly make it hard for them in many cases
Right.
across many organizations, and there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. And there has been a lot of discussion of it's even a common assumption, right, of AI structurally favoring attackers, because offense is easier to automate in some cases than defense. Do you buy that, or do you think that there is some level of a kind of defender's advantage in this shift?
I mean, I think that any tech, for at least as long as I've been around it, there is some truth to, the attacker only has to be right once, whereas the defender has to be right every time in order to, defend their perimeter. So I think there's some grain of truth there, but that's just that is what it is. That's like complaining about taxes. Like, okay, but why? Why bother, right? The good news is, I think if you really look at the principles of defensive security, which haven't really changed, lots of smart people help think through things like layered defense and, zero trust, posture, and all those same principles still help you in the world of AI. It's a question of, and they're still important in the world of AI, and it's a question of how can you accelerate your security program? Where can you do more for less, do it faster, do it with fewer, human loops, all those kinds of things I think are the material things that speed up the defenders. And, is it harder to be a defender than to be an attacker? Yeah, maybe a little bit, but I don't think AI has changed that.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think they may find efficiencies or optimizations, but that they always have had a bit of an advantage just because of the nature of the career field and nature of cybersecurity, of how it works, right? And you and I were talking about this before we jumped on a little bit, but there's this whole notion of AI-driven discovery, or the industrialization, right, of discovering
Yeah.
vulnerabilities with AI. And not that finding vulnerabilities was a bottleneck already, but it's kind of exacerbated that. Now the bottleneck, of course, is like deciding which ones matter. Why does cheaper discovery via AI actually increase the demand for contextualization, prioritization, and so on, rather than reduce it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think there's kind of two dimensions to this from my perspective. I mean, the first is, if you just look over the last 10 years, publicly found vulnerabilities have been growing, and well before AI, there was other cool pieces of technology that allowed new categories of findings, and so that's just kind of been continuing for quite some time. Are we seeing an acceleration thanks to, the new models and new techniques? For sure, we're seeing an accel. That's cool. I mean, it is good. It is a good thing that we're finding more of these vulnerabilities earlier in the life cycle. But I think it's been true for a long time that the average organization both couldn't and shouldn't worry about every single potential vulnerability that might be present in their environment, you know, because of things like reachability. Look, yeah, well, there's a vulnerability on that thing, but it's blocked behind a firewall. Well, that matters, right? Things like, oh, there might be a vulnerability on that endpoint, but that code actually never runs. So it is theoretically a vulnerability, but it's not actually practically a vulnerability. So why spend your cycles on that, right? And there's 100 examples like this where you could say, you shouldn't worry about it. Like, it's a waste of your energy to go worry about it, right? Maybe one of the ones that could shift, I don't think there's evidence that it's shifting, or at least I haven't seen evidence, is there used to be a kind of faster than the bear, or sorry, faster than the other guy who is not faster than the bear. And I think if you kind of squint at what might happen, with more and more automation, you might just see that what used to be a scarce, there's some level of scarcity of attacks, previously. And as automation and AI drives the cost of attacks down, you know, it might be if you were, I'm making this up, but if you were, one of the, 20 oil and gas companies and there was some bad actor that likes to target oil and gas, you know, if you were in the top 5 with your security posture, you're probably reasonably safe because the bad actors are going to target the people who are worse, right? No one would ever say that out loud, or they might say it at a cocktail party, but like they certainly wouldn't say that was their strategy to their board or to their public. But, for people who thought that way, that might be a thing that you'd say you're probably on borrowed time with that mentality. And I wouldn't wait. I would hustle to change that mentality and start evolving your security program now.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't use that as a security strategy of just, hey, we don't need to be worried about it. We're not big enough or we're not a big enough target. I think AI does democratize the offensive capability, just like
Yeah,
it does the defensive capability
that's right.
to some extent. So now everyone may be fair game, or you can just be more efficient or effective with casting a net of malicious activities. You touched on this a little bit when you talked about reachability, for example. For a security team already drowning in massive amount of vulnerability backlogs and findings, now facing this AI-driven surge, what would you actually change about how they prioritize and act? Maybe even starting this quarter.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is where you know, the tooling really, I don't know how to do this without better tooling, right? And so obviously Tenable has a set of tools that do this, but the key here is to say you need to you need to first have real clarity and telemetry coming from every asset in your environment that matters, on-prem, if you have a data center, OT environments, identity infrastructure, cloud, all your AI infrastructure. Like if you're blind to parts of your infrastructure, well, you're already kind of screwed up, from day one. So, amazing visibility, step one. Now you got to bring that all together, and now you start to say, now we look at security controls, reachability, exploitability. What's the connection between those different assets? Man, that's a lot of compute and a lot of context to put together. And now you say, okay, now let's add threat intelligence on top of that and say, what do we know the bad actors are doing, right? And in here we shouldn't forget, this isn't just classic code vulnerabilities. It's code vulnerabilities and misconfigurations and over permissions and the long list of real things that happen in an environment. And so once you've got all that, now you say, great, I have 10,000 theoretical vulnerabilities, but I actually have 100 or 500 that are really truly scary right now. Okay, great. I can start to manage that. But even then, you say, well, 5 years ago, you might say, great, let's have a project and have a bunch of humans who work on that and they're going to burn it down and, they'll make progress over the next couple of months. And that's the other place where I think AI is changing the game and saying, we've got to move faster. And as part of that, we need to find ways to still have human insight, but not have human be the bottleneck of every remediation step. And that's tricky on 2 dimensions. One is the actual rethink your workflow, get the right technology in place. That's kind of 90% of the problem. And I'll jokingly say the other 90% of the problem is the political willingness in an organization to say, yeah, but I feel better knowing that a human being is looking at that, which I get it. And again, it's not none of this is me saying you should just trust AI and it'll do the right thing. Like all of this, a responsible security team is going to do a bunch of validation, is going to test a bunch of stuff, and they'll automate some workflows and not automate others. Like that's a responsible way of approaching this. But a lot of the customers I talk to, there's an element of, look, even in places where I hear this a lot, even in places where we can prove that we're more accurate, automated than with a human, we'll still get business pushback from our peers across the business to say, yeah, but we need a human involved. And like that you're on the wrong side of history if that's your mentality globally across your whole organization.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it's like there's that age-old saying, like under enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. Well, that applies to not just vulnerabilities, as you said, but misconfigurations,
Yeah.
overly permissive accounts, things of that nature. And I think there's kind of a consensus in the security community that the only way we're going to keep pace with AI is to use AI. And of course, like that's AI for security, but there's also the need to secure AI itself
Yeah.
with it, AI becoming its own exposure surface, the models, the agents, the
Yeah.
data they can reach, et cetera. How do you all think practitioners should start thinking about securing AI itself, in addition to just, beyond just deploying it and using it too?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's there's a little bit of a bias in this statement, but I think it's right, which is to say that AI is special and it's not special at the same time. And here's what I mean by that. You know, it's just another attack surface. It's not magic. Like AI is running on desktops and on laptops, and it's running in your cloud workloads, and you're licensing SaaS software that's using AI that creates risks and exposures. Like you know, and I think that there's the normal part of we're, you know, we're wrapping our, as an industry, we're wrapping our heads around a set of technology. And there are things that are truly novel, and there's other things that we say, hey, this falls into a pattern that we understand. But, I think what we're finding is 80 or 90% of it is patterns we understand. And the faster we just use the techniques we've come up with to apply. So, what do I mean by that? At a high level, I break it down and say, problem number one is, do you know where AI is used in your organization? Most customers today, the answer is no. They don't have a really robust sense of where AI is used in the organization. And like we've built a bunch of tools and extended our Tenable One platform to make it really easy. We're already scanning the endpoint, looking at vulnerabilities. We'll scan the endpoint and also look for artifacts of shadow AI, right? Now, of course, we don't know if it's shadow AI or not because we don't know what you've approved in your organization. But when we surface that to customers, 99.999% of the customer conversations I've had, they're surprised about something. Oh my God, I had no idea we had OpenClaw there. We're not supposed to have OpenClaw, that, and we're doing the same thing with cloud scanning and OT scanning and all the other things that we already do because we already scan across the entire enterprise, every single type of asset you might have in the enterprise. And so our point of view is to say, why would you do that twice? Like just you're already interrogating that asset to understand a bunch of properties about the asset. Just also ask the right questions to get back what kind of AI is there. Okay, that's step one. Now most customers say, okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff there I didn't want to be there. Now, how do I just get rid of the noise? Like I want to block a set of things, for a lot of customers, they've already got the tools to do this. Oh, I need to update, my CASB or my firewall or some other set of security controls I've got just to say, I didn't realize people were doing that. I'll probably send an email to people telling them don't do it, update my policy guidelines. And, I want a deterministic way of making sure that stuff's not coming into the enterprise. Great. Now you go a next step further and you say, okay, you've now gotten a handle on what's running. You've gotten out the obvious bad stuff you didn't want to have in your environment. But now you have a large set of things that you do want in your environment. Well, how's that stuff connected? And this is where I'd say this is not a new pattern. What you see with AI is AI in all of its forms gets connected to other resources in the organization, and it's often there's a set of risk that comes from the actual configuration of the whatever it is, an agent built on top of Amazon Bedrock or an agent running in some local model on an endpoint. Sure, you can misconfigure that. Sure, it can have a vulnerability. Yes, that's important to go take care of that stuff. But the much harder thing is to see, ooh, that agent is connected to this data store. That data store is connected to an identity. That identity is over permissioned. all of a sudden you've got an attack path that, this is where looking at the world, I'll say holistically, rather than kind of looking at AI through blinders is really important because realistically, that's where we see the majority of the risk coming from is that interconnection. And then when you start saying that, you just say, wait, didn't you just describe exposure management? Like, didn't you just describe like actually looking at the different pieces of your infrastructure and how they connect together and making sure you're looking at the risk overall? And I'd say, yeah. And then I'd say the final piece of the puzzle for us is to say, the first layer is discovery. The second layer is, we kind of call it infrastructure protection, of kind of looking at how the pieces of AI infrastructure are connected to the other infrastructure that you have. Kind of the last piece is around actual monitoring and governance of what people are doing. And this is everything from, are people maliciously trying to, prompt inject? Can you detect that and go do something about it? That could be an insider, that could be a frustrated employee, it could be a million things, but like that's a category of risk that you got to worry about. Are people just accidentally trying to get access to stuff? Like this is something we see quite a lot, and our product today does, is just someone will ask some very simple question and like, tell me something about the budget. And if that agent is either if the agent is misconfigured or if the agent is connected to a data store that's misconfigured, what we're seeing is there's a new blast radius of like that database that was misconfigured for a long time. Realistically, it was a needle in a haystack problem. Your internal employees weren't stumbling across that database every day. But the second you connect that to a chatbot or an agent, all of a sudden some harmless question from someone in, HR or engineering or sales, hey, tell me about the budget for blah. And now you get a response that's actually a bunch of very sensitive data about budget stuff they shouldn't have access to. That starts to be a real problem. So that is a place where I think there's AI amplifies a risk that was already in the organization. And so how do we give people tools to get ahead of that?
Yeah, I think you're spot on. A couple of things there. One is agents as a new kind of, I want to say attack service, but they take these non-deterministic, unpredictable behaviors in the environment and maybe things that weren't a problem before, all of a sudden are a problem when you have agents with autonomy and tool access and things like that. And I love the emphasis on broader context, like not looking at vulnerabilities from a narrow myopic scope, but like the entities associated with them, the users, the databases, all the architectural context, right? That makes it make more sense to the enterprise of trying to prioritize risks is something that I think we historically haven't done as good of a job as we could do. And we talked about the role of AI for security. You all are one of the companies I think that are helping pioneer of like, what does this look like of putting AI capabilities in the hands of defenders through your platform? And you've been using some of these AI exposure capabilities in the customer's hands. For example, Tenable AI exposure, Hexa AI, et cetera. What are some early and maybe surprising patterns and how teams are using this to kind of capitalize on it and take advantage of the AI security data they're getting out of that?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two categories, right? So like with AI exposure, which is what we think about as helping you secure your AI usage, right? I think I've already hit the high points of hey, you really got to look at it end to end. You got to have great visibility. You got to protect it. And I think the things we're learning there, again, mostly follow the same kinds of patterns of what the industry learned about when cloud started, getting lots of adoption in enterprises. It's a similar set of problems. I don't have visibility into that. Ooh, I need to better control how my other parts of my employees are using that technology. And that's just a little bit of a process that the industry has to work through. I think the other dimension, so thanks for the plug on Hexa. So for those who don't know, Hexa is it's a part of our Tenable One product, and it's basically the agentic engine that goes and gets stuff done for you. So it helps you accelerate your work and helps you do some work autonomously if you choose to help run your security program. And it's really been a fascinating journey for us. So we announced this at RSA just a few months ago. We just went generally available last month at our exposure conference. And so we have a bunch of customers now who've been using this and kind of giving us great feedback. a couple of interesting learnings. So the first is to say, and this is no surprise to the practitioners out there, but you know, there's a lot of pretty awful toil in the average security team's job. There's a lot of repetitive stuff. There's a lot of copying stuff from a spreadsheet over here to over there, or waking up every Monday and spending 2 hours configuring something or messing with configure something. We're seeing an example in our world is a lot of our customers spend a lot of time creating tags, different tagging schemes for different assets. And in the old world, this is, many hours a month that complicated enterprises are spending kind of messing with this, and a human being doing this. And a lot of our customers have said, hey, I used to spend, like one customer that shared with us that they measured this. Their average was they were spending 2 full days a month for one person on the team doing this, and that now it was completely automated. And that's kind of music to our ears. Like that's one of the things we're trying to enable is just get the drudgery out of and everybody on a security team knows there's a million problems you could go spend your time on. But if you're stuck in the drudgery, there's only so much you can advance your program. So that's one big chunk of what we're trying to do, and feeling like we're on the road to that. We're getting great feedback about what we've delivered for folks so far. The other thing is really kind of connecting back to, well, how do you move faster? How do you automate some of these workflows? So we have a bunch of customers who've started to use Hexa to automate some of their remediation workflows. And we had one customer come and talk through something they built at this conference I mentioned, and I think we're working on getting that posted online so that people can check it out. But this is can't name the customer, but yet until it's public. But this is a customer that has a lot of kind of manufacturing facilities, and so the parts of their infrastructure have very strict change windows where you say, you can't update the plant when it's in the middle of the day, the 8-hour shift of activity. This is a made up example, but and so, okay, I mean, if it's bad enough, maybe you can, but for most of the run of the mill stuff, you do that. And so what they've put together is a really custom workflow built on Hexa that really automates 80 or 90% of things with no human in the loop, and then for a set of these things, here's an issue, there's X assets in that manufacturing facility, let's schedule it for the next change window, but let's go ahead and make sure a human being knows that we did that, because effectively you are accepting some risk, right, by waiting 3 days until that change window. But all that stuff is enabling them to do in minutes or hours what was previously going to take them a bunch of days for humans poking buttons, opening up Jira tickets, copying stuff from one place to another, and so you can start to see the possibility, and you're starting to see some of our customers realize the possibility of true acceleration of the, find, fix, validate that you fixed kind of loop, which is really exciting.
Yeah, it's I'm personally excited about it because I spent a lot of time in vulnerability management, and it can be a lot of drudgery, to your point. And I think there's opportunity to accelerate a lot of that, and to your point, focus on things that matter to the organization more, remediate that, kind of that OODA loop that you talked about, find, fix, prioritize, act, etc. Like do that much faster and more efficiently, which is, we should be trying to be just as efficient as the attackers are using this technology. And I wanted to ask, as someone building, from the platform side of this, what does the wave of AI discovered vulnerabilities demand from platform providers, you all and others, and maybe something you would like to see, maybe a call to action for your fellow platform providers, that something you all could be doing, and you all may be doing already, right, to empower defenders?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a scale component, right? As we talked about earlier, discovery of vulnerabilities has been going up and to the right for a long time. But we're certainly expecting even more of an acceleration now. I think that we were talking before the recording started about the episode you did, just a week or two ago, about talking about how that's great, but the bottleneck has not really been discovery for a long time. And I think, I agreed with the conversation on that AI is helping the fixing of issues, but not as much as it's helping the finding of issues. So I think it'll be interesting to see how much does the actual number of patch vulnerabilities, you know, accelerate over the next year or two. I think even if they accelerate like crazy, it's great, but you've still got all the other misconfigurations. And one thing I just point out, if people haven't read the excellent Verizon data breach report, every year it's a great read. We contributed extensively to that this year, and kind of one of the things that was really interesting in that is about 2/3 of the breaches come from non-CVE vulnerabilities, so misconfigurations of one sort or another. And that's not shocking to folks who are kind of in the industry, but it was great to see that kind of statistically across a large set of companies. And if you look inside of the Tenable One platform, about 1/3 of our total findings for the average customers are non-CVE based. So kind of if you put those two pieces together, you'd say, so for the average customer, 1/3 of their findings are 2/3 of their risk, right? And so, you got to worry about the whole thing. But, as the discovery curve keeps going up of different classes of vulnerabilities and issues, you got to get better at prioritization, and you got to get better at action is basically and that prioritization. You don't have time to chase something that's already mitigated by a security control, and yet a whole lot of organizations haven't correlated those two things yet, right? They've got security controls and they've got a VM program, or some other part of their security program, and it's like night and day. They're not talking to each other at all. And again, it's not about getting the humans to talk. That doesn't scale. It's about getting the tooling to allow you to, in real time at scale, do that. But just kind of the last thought about scale is, I'd say we're a little lucky and a little bit smart in that, we've been looking at vulnerabilities as a scale game for a long time. And so, last year, 2025, it was like 45,000, named CVEs. And we shipped about 70,000 plugins to our scanners, because you find more than just those things. So we've built a machine that's pretty amazing, about how we automate discovery of that. And of course, there are humans helping it, but this is not humans sitting in a corner typing, for most of this. There's a tremendous amount of automation. And so, what I would say about, look, if we really do see a 10x increase of vulnerabilities, I'd say I'd be a little surprised, but I'd also say bring it. Like, we're ready.
That's awesome. I love the confidence there. So last question for you, like in this agentic era, like maybe looking out, say 12, 24 months, I know it's hard to predict, but, and you started this conversation of being attracted to Tenable due to the exposure management kind of opportunity, right? What does good exposure management look like in the agentic era? Like, what does it look like to get it right? And what would you love to see things look like in a year or so, in the industry?
Yeah, it's great. It's a hard question, but it's a great question. I think that part of what makes it a hard question is there's every different customer is in just a different stage. And so kind of the person that hasn't deployed MFA, ignore it, ignore exposure management, go do that, right? Once you've done that, then let's talk about exposure management, But so people are at different places in the maturity curve, and you've got to be honest with yourself about where you are and what the next thing is on the maturity curve. But, we have tens of thousands of customers and who are using Tenable today, and that doesn't mean they're all very far on the maturity curve. But the real thing, I think, is very few customers have 100% visibility of their environment. Almost everybody has some known blind spot of some source. I think that's really dangerous. I'd love to see people close those blind spots. The tech exists. There's good reasons why, but I don't think they're good enough reasons not to go do that. I think, of course, I'd love people to use the Tenable platform, but I also am I like fighting the bad guys and like it when all the good guys team up to fight the bad guys. And I would say you better be using tooling that correlates all this data. You gotta have a true sense of what your risk is that's looking at context and a bunch of data sources and looking at attack paths and bringing in threat intelligence. And if you're not using Tenable, use somebody good. you know the and then I think the last thing is gonna be the hardest for the average organization, which is, you know, don't take blind leaps of faith on AI. I don't think that's a good idea, but you got to push your organization's comfort zone of what's the bigger risk, a bad actor exploiting the fact that it took you 2 weeks to patch something, or running an automated patch cycle that, is there some risk? Yes. Yes, you should test it. Yes, you should, use a good product, have a good harness around that. But I think it's tempting to kind of put your head in the sand and think, well, the bad guys won't exploit that in time. And I just think that's a very dangerous assumption.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially in this age of using these tools and technology. Like, they are going to try to cover as much ground and exploit as many things as they can. And I love the call to action, even the collaborative nature of, go use, if you're not going to use us, use someone else who has a capable product. I'll be definitely personally cheering for you all, someone who's looking to put AI in the hands of defenders in an area where it's really needed in terms of exposure management, vulnerability management, etc. And I'll be keeping an eye on what you all are up to. So thanks so much for jumping on today and chatting, Eric. I really appreciate it.
Chris, as always, great to chat.
Absolutely. Take care.